Welcome back to True Crime Journal. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into one of the most heartbreaking cases I've ever covered. This is a story that will stay with you long after you finish listening. It's about love, control, and the devastating price of second chances given to those who don't deserve them. Today's case takes us to Atlanta, Georgia, where we'll meet Keisha Williams, a brilliant young woman whose faith in redemption and unwavering belief in love ultimately led to her destruction. This is a story about red flags ignored, warning signs dismissed, and the tragic consequences when we defend those who hurt us most. What makes this case particularly devastating is that it could have been prevented multiple times. The signs were all there. The warnings came from every direction. Yet love, or what Keisha believed was love, blinded her to the danger that lived under her own roof. This is the story of Keisha Williams, and it's a story that every person in a relationship needs to hear. Keisha Williams grew up in Riverside, a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta where dreams felt both possible and impossibly far away. The streets were lined with modest homes, each one telling a story of families working hard to build something better for their children. The Williams family lived in a small brick house on Maple Street that Keisha's grandfather had bought in 1962. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. The paint was always peeling somewhere, and the front steps creaked under your weight. But inside, it was filled with love, laughter, and an unshakable belief in the power of education. Keisha's mother, Denise, was a force of nature. At 5 feet 2 inches tall, she commanded respect wherever she went. During the day, she worked as a hospital aide at Grady Memorial, helping patients and supporting nurses. In the evenings, she cleaned office buildings downtown, mopping floors and emptying trash cans while the city's business elite went home to their comfortable lives. Denise rarely complained about the long hours or the aching in her feet. She had a mission: to ensure her daughter would never have to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. "Baby girl," Denise would tell Keisha while reviewing her homework at the kitchen table, "your education is your ticket out of here. Not out because there's anything wrong with where we come from, but out because you deserve to have choices." "I never had choices." "You will." Keisha's father, Jerome, worked the night shift at the Ford assembly plant in Hapeville. He'd been there for 15 years, his hands permanently stained with grease, his back perpetually sore from bending over car parts. Jerome was a quiet man who spoke carefully and deliberately, weighing his words like they cost money. Every morning, when he came home from his shift, Jerome would stop by Keisha's room to check on her before she left for school. If she was struggling with math homework, he'd sit with her and work through problems until she understood. If she had a science project, he'd help her build models in the garage, teaching her about precision and attention to detail. "You're destined for bigger things, princess," Jerome would tell his daughter, his voice soft but certain. "Don't let your circumstances define your future. You define your future." The Williams household ran on a strict schedule built around Keisha's education. Homework came before television. Reading came before playing outside. School events were prioritized over everything else, even when it meant Denise or Jerome had to miss work and lose pay they couldn't afford to lose. When Keisha's teachers recommended she take advanced placement classes, Denise and Jerome didn't hesitate, even though it meant buying expensive textbooks and paying for standardized tests. When she wanted to join the debate team, they figured out how to pay for the travel expenses to competitions across the state. Keisha thrived under their support and expectations. She was naturally brilliant, with a quick mind and an infectious curiosity about the world beyond Riverside. Her teachers recognized her potential early on. By middle school, she was already reading at a college level. By high school, she was earning straight A's while participating in student government, debate team, and the academic decathlon. Mrs. Patterson, her high school guidance counselor, called Keisha into her office during her junior year with news that would change everything. "Keisha, I've been reviewing your grades and test scores," Mrs. Patterson said, spreading papers across her desk. "You have a real shot at getting into some excellent universities. I'm talking about schools that could open doors you never imagined." Keisha felt her heart race. College had always been the goal, but she'd assumed she'd end up at a local community college or maybe Georgia State if she was lucky. "What kind of schools?" she asked. "Spelman, Howard, even some Ivy League schools if you keep your grades up and ace your SATs." When Keisha came home that day and told her parents about the conversation, Denise started crying right there in the kitchen. Jerome sat down heavily in his chair and just shook his head in amazement. "Our baby girl," he whispered. Our baby girl's going to college. By senior year, Keisha had earned a partial scholarship to Georgia State University to study business administration. It wasn't a full ride, but combined with financial aid, student loans, and the money her parents had been saving in a coffee can hidden in their bedroom closet, it was enough. The day Keisha graduated from high school as valedictorian, Denise wore her best dress and Jerome took his first day off from the plant in 3 years. They sat in the front row, tears streaming down their faces as their daughter walked across the stage. The first Williams to graduate from high school, Jerome said proudly to anyone who would listen. And she's not stopping there. Damon Brooks walked into the Metropolitan like he owned the place, which, Keisha would later learn, he practically did. At 27, he moved with the kind of confidence that only comes from a lifetime of having doors open for you. He was celebrating with 3 friends, all of them dressed in expensive suits that probably cost more than Keisha's tuition for a semester. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu without looking at prices, and Damon barely glanced at the wine list before ordering a bottle that cost $800. But what struck Keisha most about Damon wasn't his obvious wealth. It was the way he looked at her. Not like she was a server whose job was to bring him food, but like she was someone worth knowing. "What's your name?" he asked when she came to take their order, his eyes never leaving her face. "Keisha," she replied, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite the flutter in her stomach. "Keisha," he repeated, like he was testing how her name felt in his mouth. "I'm Damon. These are my business partners, but they're not nearly as interesting as you." His friends laughed, but Damon kept his attention focused entirely on Keisha. Throughout the evening, every time she came to their table, he found reasons to extend their conversations. He asked about her major, her career goals, her thoughts on everything from business ethics to her favorite books. "You're not like most people I meet," he told her when she brought the check. "You're real. You work hard. You have goals." "I respect that." Coming from a man who clearly had everything, the compliment meant more than it probably should have. "I don't date customers," Keisha said with a smile, trying to hide how flustered she felt. "That's good," Damon replied, signing the check and leaving a tip that was twice what Keisha usually made in an entire shift. "Because after tonight, I won't be a customer anymore. I'll be the man who's going to take you somewhere special." He handed her a business card with his phone number written on the back. "Call me when you're ready to see how the other half lives." That night, Keisha lay in her dorm room staring at the business card. Damon Brooks, it read. Real estate development. The address was in Buckhead, Atlanta's wealthiest neighborhood. She'd grown up watching her parents work themselves to exhaustion for every dollar. She'd spent 3 years serving wealthy people who treated her like she was invisible. And now one of those wealthy people was asking her out. Part of her wanted to throw the card away. Men like Damon didn't date girls like her, at least not seriously. But another part of her, the part that had always dreamed of something bigger, whispered that maybe this was her chance to see what life could be like on the other side. 3 days later, she called him. Their first date was unlike anything Keisha had ever experienced. Damon picked her up in a gleaming black Mercedes S-Class, the kind of car she'd only seen in magazines. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her parents made in a month. "You look beautiful," he said when she emerged from her dorm in her best dress, a simple black number she'd bought on sale at Macy's. He took her to Bones, one of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurants, where the maitre d' greeted Damon by name and immediately led them to what was obviously his regular table. The wine list didn't have prices on it, which Keisha learned meant that if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. "Order whatever you want," Damon said, noticing her hesitation as she looked at the menu. "Tonight is about you." Over dinner, Damon told her about his life. He'd grown up in Buckhead, the son of Marcus Brooks, who owned one of Atlanta's largest construction companies. But Damon had wanted to make his own way in the world, using a small inheritance from his grandfather to start investing in real estate. "I bought my first property when I was 22, he explained over dessert. A small apartment building in Midtown that everyone said was in a bad area. I renovated it, raised the rents, and sold it 2 years later for double what I paid. That's when I knew I had a gift for this." By 25, he'd made his first million. By 27, he owned a portfolio of properties across Atlanta and was expanding into other cities. "Everything I touch turns to gold," he said with a confidence that was both attractive and slightly unsettling. "And now I've found you, so I'm the luckiest man in Georgia." When he drove her back to campus that night, Keisha felt like she was living in a fairy tale. Damon was everything she'd never dared to dream of, successful, charming, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. "I want to see you again," he said as they sat in his car outside her dorm. "Soon. I'd like that," Keisha replied, meaning it completely. Their second date was even more extravagant. Damon flew her to Savannah for the weekend, putting her up in a suite at the most expensive hotel in the historic district. They walked through the city's beautiful squares, had dinner at restaurants she'd only read about in travel magazines, and talked about everything from literature to politics to their dreams for the future. "I've never met anyone like you," Damon told her as they sat on a bench overlooking the Savannah River. "You're beautiful, brilliant, and you understand what it means to work for something. Most of the women I meet just want my money. You want to make your own." It was the perfect thing to say, and Keisha found herself falling hard and fast. By their fourth date, Damon was talking about introducing her to his family. By their sixth date, he was discussing their future together like it was a foregone conclusion. "I want to take care of you," he said one evening as they sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking the Atlanta skyline. "Not because you can't take care of yourself, but because I want to. I want to give you everything you've ever dreamed of." For a girl who had grown up watching her parents struggle to pay bills, the offer was intoxicating. Here was a man who could provide security, luxury, and love all at once. When Damon met Denise and Jerome, he was the picture of respectful charm. He complimented Denise on her cooking, asked Jerome thoughtful questions about his work at the plant, and spoke eloquently about his intentions toward their daughter. "Your daughter is remarkable," he told them over dinner at their modest dining room table. "She's going to do incredible things in this world, and I want to support her in every way possible." Denise was charmed by his manners and obvious success. Jerome was more cautious, but even he seemed impressed by Damon's apparent sincerity. It was only later, after Damon had left, that Jerome pulled Keisha aside. "He seems like a good man," Jerome said carefully, "but there's something about the way he looks at you that bothers me." "What do you mean, Daddy?" Jerome struggled to put his feelings into words. "He looks at you like you're something he bought, baby girl. Like you're a possession instead of a person. Men who are used to getting everything they want don't like being told no." Keisha dismissed her father's concerns as overprotectiveness. She was in love, and for the first time in her life, she could see a future free from financial worry and struggle. When Damon proposed 6 months later with a diamond ring that was bigger and more beautiful than anything she'd ever imagined, Keisha didn't hesitate to say yes. "You're going to be my queen," he whispered as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I'm going to give you the world." The wedding was everything Damon had promised, a fairy tale come to life. He insisted on paying for everything, from Keisha's designer dress to the reception at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. No expense was spared. Denise and Jerome felt out of place among Damon's wealthy friends and family, but they smiled and tried to blend in. They were proud of their daughter, even if they didn't quite understand how she'd ended up in this glittering world. "Our baby's living the dream," Denise whispered to Jerome as they watched Keisha dance with her new husband. After the honeymoon in Italy, another extravagant gesture that left Keisha breathless, they moved into Damon's mansion in Buckhead. The house was enormous, with 6 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a swimming pool that looked like it belonged at a resort. "This is all ours now," Damon said as he carried Keisha over the threshold. "Our palace." It was during their first week of married life that Damon made his first suggestion about Keisha's future. "You know, baby, you don't really need to finish school right now," he said over breakfast. "We're starting our life together, and I can provide for us completely. You could always go back to school later if you really want to." Keisha felt a flicker of unease. "I only have 1 more year left. I've worked so hard to get this far." "I know you have, and I'm proud of you for that. But think about it. Why stress yourself with classes and part-time jobs when you could focus on us? On building our family?" The word family made Keisha's heart skip. They talked about having children, but she'd assumed it would be after she graduated. "Are you saying you want to start trying for a baby now?" Damon's smile was warm and loving. "I'm saying I want to start our real life together." College was preparation for the future. This is the future. It was hard to argue with his logic, especially when he was offering her everything she'd ever wanted. When Keisha told her parents she was dropping out of school, they were devastated. "But you only have 1 year left," Denise pleaded over the phone. "You've worked so hard for this. I can always go back later, Mama. Right now, I want to focus on my marriage." Jerome was more direct. "That boy's trying to control you, Keisha. Mark my words, a man who doesn't want his wife to have her own education, her own career, her own money is a man who's planning to keep her dependent." But Keisha was in love and living in luxury beyond her wildest dreams. Her father's warnings felt like pessimism in the face of her perfect new life. When Keisha discovered she was pregnant 3 months after the wedding, Damon was ecstatic. He immediately started planning the nursery, hiring designers, and buying everything the baby could possibly need. "Our little princess is going to have everything," he said, his hands on Keisha's still flat stomach. "The best of everything." Their daughter Aaliyah was born healthy and beautiful, with Keisha's eyes and Damon's smile. For a while, life truly was perfect. Damon was an attentive husband and devoted father, coming home early from work to spend time with his girls. But perfection, Keisha would learn, was a mask that could slip at any moment. The first signs of trouble were so subtle that Keisha almost missed them. It started with phone calls. Damon had always been attentive, calling to check on her during the day and asking about her plans. At first, it felt romantic, evidence of how much he cared about her and missed her when they were apart. But gradually, the calls became more frequent and the questions more detailed. Where was she going? Who was she with? When would she be back? If she didn't answer immediately, he would call again and again until she picked up. "I worry about you," he would say when she mentioned that his constant calling made her feel anxious. "There are a lot of dangerous people out there, and you're too trusting. I just want to make sure you're safe." When Aaliyah was 2 years old, Keisha decided to take a part-time job at a marketing firm downtown. She loved being a mother, but she missed adult interaction and the intellectual stimulation of work. "Why do you need a job?" Damon asked when she told him about the opportunity. "Are we having financial problems I don't know about?" "No, of course not. I just want to do something for myself. Keep my mind sharp, you know?" Damon's expression was unreadable. "If you're bored, we can travel more. Take classes. Join the country club. You don't need to work with strangers." But Keisha had made up her mind. The job was only 3 days a week, and Damon's mother had volunteered to babysit Aaliyah. On her first day at work, Keisha felt alive in a way she hadn't experienced since college. She was good at the work, and her colleagues treated her as an equal. For 8 hours a day, she wasn't Mrs. Damon Brooks. She was just Keisha, using her brain and contributing to something meaningful. It was during her second week that she mentioned a male colleague named Marcus who was helping her learn the company's client management system. "Marcus showed me how to generate reports more efficiently today," she said casually over dinner. "He's really patient with new people." Damon's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Marcus? You didn't tell me you'd be working closely with men." Keisha looked up, surprised by the edge in his voice. "Well, there are men and women at the office. It's a workplace, Damon. Are you attracted to him?" The question was so unexpected that Keisha actually laughed. "What? No. He's just a coworker helping me learn the system." But Damon wasn't laughing. His jaw was tight, and there was something cold in his eyes that Keisha had never seen before. "Then why are you talking about him? Why does his name even come up in our conversation?" "I was just telling you about my day," Keisha said, her heart beginning to race as she recognized that something was very wrong. "The same way you tell me about people at your office. That's different. I own my company. I'm not some employee getting help from male colleagues." The way he said "help" made it sound dirty, inappropriate. Keisha felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You're being ridiculous. Marcus is married with kids. He's just being friendly." Damon stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward, the crash echoing through their elegant dining room. "Ridiculous? I work my ass off to provide for this family, to give you everything you could possibly want, and you're calling me ridiculous for being concerned about my wife spending time with other men." His voice had risen to a shout, and Keisha instinctively glanced toward the stairs, worried that the noise would wake Aaliyah. "You don't need that job," Damon continued, his voice getting louder with each word. "We don't need the money. The only reason for you to work is if you're looking for something I'm not giving you at home." Keisha had never seen him like this. His face was red, a vein pulsing visibly in his forehead. For the first time since she'd known him, she felt afraid of her husband. "That's not true," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "I love you, Damon. I just want to use my education to contribute something to the world." "You are contributing. You're raising our daughter. You're being my wife. Why isn't that enough for you?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with accusation and hurt. Keisha realized that there was no good answer, at least not one that Damon wanted to hear. "I'm sorry," she said finally, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. "I didn't mean to upset you." As quickly as the storm had arrived, it passed. Damon's face softened, and he picked up his fallen chair. I'm sorry too, baby. I don't know what came over me. It's just that I love you so much, and the thought of other men being around you all day makes me crazy. There are a lot of predators out there who would love to take advantage of someone as beautiful and trusting as you. That night, Damon made love to her with desperate intensity, whispering apologies and declarations of love. The next morning, there was a diamond tennis bracelet on her pillow with a note that read, "To remind you how much you mean to me." A week later, Keisha quit her job. It wasn't worth the tension at home, she told herself. Damon was under a lot of pressure with his business, and she didn't want to add to his stress. But deep down, she knew something fundamental had changed in their marriage. She just wasn't ready to admit what it was. What Keisha didn't realize was that the argument about her job had established a pattern that would define the next several years of her life. Damon's outburst hadn't been an isolated incident triggered by work stress. It had been a test. And by quitting her job, Keisha had failed it in exactly the way Damon had wanted her to. She had learned that her husband's love came with conditions, and that keeping the peace was her responsibility. Over the following months, Damon's controlling behavior became more systematic and sophisticated. He started managing all their finances, giving Keisha a weekly allowance for household expenses and requiring her to show him receipts for everything she bought. "I'm just trying to keep us organized," he explained when Keisha questioned the new system. "This way we can track our spending and make sure we're staying on budget." But there was no budget that Keisha could see, and the allowance he gave her was barely enough to cover groceries for the week, let alone any personal expenses. When Keisha became pregnant with their second daughter, Zaria, Damon's possessiveness intensified. He insisted on driving her to every doctor's appointment, claiming he wanted to be involved in every aspect of the pregnancy. "I don't want you driving while you're pregnant," he said when Keisha suggested she could handle the appointments on her own. "What if something happened to you or the baby while I wasn't there?" He installed security cameras around their house, ostensibly for protection but placed in locations that allowed him to monitor Keisha's movements throughout the day. When she questioned the need for so many cameras, he became defensive. "We live in an expensive neighborhood with expensive things. We need security. Besides, this way I can check on you and Aaliyah during the day and know you're safe." The cameras made Keisha feel like a prisoner in her own home, but Damon's explanation sounded reasonable enough that she felt guilty for objecting. He began monitoring the mileage on her car, questioning her if it was higher than he expected. He installed tracking software on her phone, claiming it was for safety purposes in case she ever had an emergency. Most insidiously, he started isolating Keisha from her support network. When Denise called to check on them, Damon would often answer the phone and engage in long conversations about his business or current events, effectively preventing Keisha from having private conversations with her mother. "Your mom called, but you were busy with the baby," he would tell Keisha later. "We had a nice chat though. I told her how well you're doing." When Keisha tried to call her mother back, Denise would often say something like, "Oh, Damon told me all about your week. It sounds like you're keeping busy." Gradually, Keisha's friendships began to wither. Damon found fault with each of her friends in turn. Sarah was too dramatic and probably jealous of what we have. Jessica was a bad influence who doesn't understand commitment. Monica was too nosy and asked too many personal questions. One by one, Keisha stopped inviting friends over, tired of Damon's subtle criticism and the tension their presence created in the house. When Jerome expressed concern about how rarely they saw Keisha and the girls, Damon engineered a conflict that led to months of estrangement. "Your father thinks I'm not good enough for you," Damon told Keisha after a particularly tense family dinner. "He's always looking at me like I'm some kind of criminal. It's disrespectful, and I don't think we should expose the girls to that kind of negativity." The argument that followed was painful and confusing. Jerome had indeed been critical of some of Damon's comments during dinner, but Keisha couldn't tell if her father was being unfairly judgmental or if he was seeing something she was missing. In the end, it was easier to avoid family gatherings than to deal with the conflict they created at home. "Your family means well," Damon would say when Keisha cried about missing her parents, "but they're stuck in a limited mindset. They can't understand the life we're building together because they've never had anything like it." Slowly but surely, Keisha's world shrank to the confines of their beautiful house and the boundaries of Damon's approval. By the time Zaria was born, Keisha was living in a state of constant hypervigilance. She had learned to read Damon's moods like a meteorologist reads weather patterns, always scanning for signs of an approaching storm. Certain things were guaranteed to set him off. Dinner being late, the house not being perfect when he came home from work, the girls being too loud, or Keisha mentioning anything that could be construed as criticism of him or their life together. Other triggers were less predictable. Sometimes he would come home in a good mood and stay that way all evening. Other times, he would walk through the door already angry about something that had happened at work, and Keisha would spend the rest of the night trying to avoid saying or doing anything that might redirect his anger toward her. The girls, now 4 and newborn, had already learned to adapt to their father's moods. Aaliyah, who was naturally outgoing and energetic, had become quiet and watchful when Damon was home. She would play silently in her room or sit perfectly still while watching television, always alert for signs that Daddy was getting upset. Keisha's heart broke watching her daughter suppress her natural personality to avoid conflict, but she didn't know how to fix the situation without making it worse. The physical violence started small and escalated gradually, so gradually that Keisha didn't recognize it as a pattern until it was too late. The first time Damon put his hands on her, it wasn't technically hitting. They were arguing about money. Keisha had bought new winter clothes for Aaliyah without asking permission first, spending $50 more than her usual grocery allowance. "You can't just spend money without talking to me first," Damon said, his voice tight with controlled anger as he reviewed their credit card statement. "We have a budget for a reason." She needed winter clothes, and the sale was ending, Keisha explained. "I didn't think $50 would be a problem." "It's not about the $50. It's about respect. It's about you understanding that I work hard for every dollar that comes into this house, and you can't just spend it on whatever you want whenever you feel like it." Keisha felt a familiar flutter of panic in her chest. She had learned to recognize the signs of Damon's escalating anger, and this conversation was heading in a dangerous direction. "You're right," she said quickly. "I should have called you first." "I'm sorry." But her apology only seemed to make him angrier. "Are you? Or are you just saying that to end this conversation?" "No, I really am sorry. It won't happen again." Damon stood up from his desk chair and took a step toward her. "You know what I think? I think you're not sorry at all. I think you're just annoyed that I caught you." "That's not true, Damon. I really didn't think about it. I just saw that Aaliyah needed clothes and bought them, without thinking about me, without considering how hard I work to provide for this family, without respecting me enough to ask." Each sentence was punctuated by another step forward until Damon was standing directly in front of Keisha, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "I do respect you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you?" His hand shot out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave marks. "Because it doesn't feel like it." The grip wasn't quite painful enough to make her cry out, but it was firm enough to make it clear that he could hurt her if he wanted to. For a long moment, they stood frozen like that, Damon's hand on her arm, his eyes boring into hers. Then, as suddenly as he had grabbed her, he let go. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice immediately softening. "I didn't mean to grab you like that. I just get so frustrated when I feel like you don't hear me." The next day, there were finger-shaped bruises on Keisha's upper arm. When she looked at them in the bathroom mirror, she felt sick to her stomach. But Damon had been so apologetic, so gentle with her for the rest of the evening, that she convinced herself it had been an accident. He'd been stressed about work, and she had been careless with money. It wouldn't happen again. But it did happen again. And again. Each incident was slightly worse than the last, and each was followed by increasingly elaborate apologies and gifts. A shove during an argument about Keisha wanting to visit her parents was followed by a weekend trip to Savannah and a promise that they would see her family more often. A slap across the face during a fight about Keisha questioning one of Damon's business decisions was followed by a diamond necklace and a tearful confession about how much pressure he was under at work. A blow that left her with a black eye, carefully explained away as the result of walking into a door, was followed by a second honeymoon in the Bahamas and a recommitment ceremony where Damon promised to be a better husband. Each time, Keisha told herself that this was the last time. Each time, Damon convinced her that his behavior was the result of external stress that would eventually go away. Each time, she believed him because she needed to believe him. The alternative, that the man she loved, the father of her children, was systematically abusing her, was too horrible to contemplate. The night that nearly ended Keisha's life started like many others over the previous few years. Damon came home late from work, already agitated about a business deal that had fallen through. Keisha had waited dinner for him, keeping his food warm in the oven. The girls were already asleep upstairs. She had spent the evening helping Aaliyah with her homework and getting Zaria ready for bed, all while preparing for what she sensed might be a difficult night. She could tell from the way Damon slammed his car door and stomped up the front steps that he was in one of his moods. After 5 years of marriage, she had become an expert at reading the warning signs. "How bad is it?" she asked gently as he loosened his tie and sank into his chair at the dining table. "Richard's pulled out," Damon said, downing half his wine in one gulp. "Said the market's too unstable. Without his investment, the whole Charleston project might collapse." Keisha set his plate in front of him and tried to think of something comforting to say. "I'm sorry, baby. Is there another investor you can approach?" Damon pushed the food away without taking a bite. "I've tried everyone I know. They're all running scared, talking about recession and market corrections." He poured himself another glass of wine, larger this time. Keisha watched nervously as he drank. Alcohol always made his temper worse. "Maybe it's just a temporary setback," she offered. "You've bounced back from setbacks before." "This isn't a setback, Keisha. This is a potential disaster. I might have to liquidate assets just to cover the construction costs I've already committed to." Something in his tone made Keisha look up sharply. "What kind of assets?" Damon finally met her eyes, and she could see the fear and frustration burning there. "Properties. Maybe the lake house. Some of our investments." "The lake house? But we just finished renovating it. You said it was going to be our family retreat." "Things change," Damon snapped. "Sometimes you have to cut your losses." Keisha took a deep breath, knowing she was about to venture into dangerous territory but feeling like she had no choice. "Damon, I'm worried about our finances. You keep telling me everything's fine, but then something like this happens. I think I should know more about what's going on." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this affects me and the girls too. We're a family. We should face these problems together." "Together?" Damon's laugh was cold and humorless. "What exactly would you contribute to solving this problem? What do you know about real estate development or high-stakes investing?" The dismissal stung, particularly because Keisha knew she could have known about these things if he had allowed her to finish her education or maintain a career. "I know more than you think," she said, her voice quieter but firmer. "I was studying business before I dropped out to support your career. Maybe I could help if you actually let me." "Help?" Damon stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "You want to help? You live in this house, drive that car, wear those clothes, all because of me. Everything you have exists because I built it. And now you want to tell me how to run my business?" "That's not what I'm saying," Keisha protested, her heart beginning to race as she recognized the familiar escalation in his voice. "I just think that as your wife, I should understand what's happening with our money." "My money," Damon corrected, his voice dangerously low. "Every dollar in this house was earned by me. You've never contributed a penny to this family's income. Because you made me quit my job. Because you convinced me to drop out of school." The words were out before Keisha could stop them, and she immediately knew she had made a terrible mistake. Damon's face went completely still, his eyes turning cold in a way that made her blood freeze. "I made you," he said quietly. "I forced you to accept a life of luxury and comfort. I forced you to live in this beautiful house and raise our children without having to worry about money." "That's not what I meant," Keisha said quickly, backing toward the kitchen island. "I'm grateful for everything you've provided. I just what? Just think you could have done better on your own? Just think your little part-time job and your community college education would have gotten you further than marrying me?" The contempt in his voice was like a physical blow. Keisha felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she fought them back. Crying would only make him angrier. "I've never thought that," she said. "I love our life together. I love you. I just want to understand what's happening so I can support you better." "Support me?" Damon's voice rose to a shout. "You want to support me? Then stop questioning every decision I make. Stop acting like you know better than I do. Stop disrespecting me in my own house." The noise had gotten loud enough that Keisha worried it might wake the girls. "Please, Damon, lower your voice. The girls are sleeping. Don't tell me what to do," he roared, and for the first time that evening, Keisha saw him glance toward the drawer where he kept his gun. A cold wave of terror washed over her. In all their previous fights, even when he had hit her, she had never feared for her life. But something was different tonight. The stress of his failing business, the alcohol, the feeling of losing control, it was all combining into something much more dangerous than his usual anger. "I'm sorry," she said, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. "You're right. I shouldn't have questioned you. I trust you to handle everything." But her apology seemed to only enrage him further. "It's too late for sorry, Keisha. You've shown me exactly what you think of me. what you think of everything I've built for us." He walked to the drawer and pulled it open. Keisha's legs felt like water as she watched him pull out the sleek black pistol he had bought years earlier for home protection. "Damon, please," she whispered. "Put that away. Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking," he said, his voice eerily calm as he checked the gun's safety. "I'm thinking about how ungrateful you are. How you take everything I give you and then ask for more. How you question my decisions and disrespect my authority in my own home." "I don't mean to disrespect you," Keisha pleaded, her eyes fixed on the weapon in his hands. "I love you. I've always supported you. Please, just put the gun down and let's talk about this." "Talk?" Damon raised the gun, pointing it directly at her head. "What's there to talk about? You've made it clear that you think I'm failing as a provider, failing as a husband, failing as a man." "That's not true," Keisha cried. "I've never said any of those things. You didn't have to say them. I can see it in your eyes. The way you look at me when I tell you we need to cut expenses. The way you question my decisions. The way you act like you could do better." Time seemed to slow down as Keisha watched Damon's finger move toward the trigger. She thought about Aaliyah and Zaria sleeping upstairs, about her parents who had sacrificed so much for her education, about all the dreams she had never gotten to pursue. "Think about the girls," she said desperately. "They need their mother. Please, Damon, don't do this." For just a moment, something like sanity flickered in Damon's eyes. He looked at the gun in his hand as if surprised to find it there. But then his expression hardened again. "They'll be better off without a mother who doesn't respect their father," he said coldly. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space of their kitchen. Keisha felt the bullet tear through her skull, and then everything went black. When Keisha woke up, she was in a hospital bed surrounded by the steady beeping of machines monitoring her vital signs. Her head felt like it was splitting apart, and she couldn't move the right side of her body. "Baby," a familiar voice said softly. "Can you hear me?" Keisha turned her head slowly toward the sound and saw her mother sitting beside the bed, tears streaming down her face. "Mama." Keisha's voice was barely a whisper, and she was surprised by how difficult it was to form the word. "Oh, thank God," Denise sobbed, reaching for Keisha's hand. "The doctors weren't sure you were going to wake up. You've been in a coma for 2 weeks. What happened?" Keisha asked, though part of her already knew. The memories were fuzzy and fragmented, but she could remember the feel of the gun pointed at her head, the sound of Damon's voice filled with rage. "He shot you," Denise said, her voice breaking on the words. "That monster shot you in the head and left you to die. If Mrs. Johnson next door hadn't heard the gunshot and called 911. The reality of what had happened hit Keisha like a physical blow. Damon had actually pulled the trigger. The man she loved, the father of her children, had tried to kill her. "The girls," she asked frantically, trying to sit up despite the pain in her head. "They're safe," Denise assured her quickly. "They were asleep when it happened. Your father picked them up that night, and they've been staying with us." "And Damon?" Denise's expression hardened. "The police arrested him. He's in jail waiting for trial. They've charged him with attempted murder." Over the next several days, as Keisha slowly regained consciousness and strength, she learned more about what had happened after she was shot. Damon had initially fled the scene, but the police had caught up with him at a hotel near the airport. He claimed the shooting had been an accident, that they had struggled over the gun and it had gone off. But the evidence told a different story. The angle of the bullet wound, the gunpowder residue patterns, the testimony of neighbors who had heard Damon shouting before the shot, everything pointed to a deliberate attempt to kill his wife. The doctors explained that the bullet had lodged near her brainstem, causing significant damage to the right side of her brain. She would likely never regain full use of the right side of her body, and her speech would always be somewhat impaired. She was lucky to be alive. But despite everything, despite the bullet in her head, despite the paralysis, despite the months of rehabilitation ahead of her, Keisha found herself defending Damon when the district attorney came to interview her. "It wasn't like they're saying," she insisted, her words slurred but determined. "We were arguing, and things got heated. The gun went off during a struggle. He didn't mean to hurt me." The prosecutor, a stern woman named Sarah Mitchell, looked at Keisha with a mixture of frustration and pity. "Mrs. Brooks, I've seen the police reports from your house over the past several years. Domestic disturbance calls that you always explained away. Neighbors reporting shouting and sounds of violence. Emergency room visits for injuries you claimed were accidents. Those were accidents," Keisha maintained. "Damon loves me. He would never deliberately hurt me. He shot you in the head, Mrs. Brooks. You almost died. Your children almost lost their mother. But Keisha's loyalty to Damon ran deeper than logic or evidence. In her mind, the shooting had been the result of temporary circumstances, his business stress, their financial problems, too much alcohol. It wasn't representative of who he really was. When the case went to trial, Keisha shocked everyone by testifying on Damon's behalf. "He's a good man," she told the stunned courtroom, her words slurred from her brain injury but her conviction clear. "He works hard to provide for our family. He loves me and our children. What happened was an accident." Her parents watched in horror from the gallery. Jerome had to be escorted out when he started shouting at his daughter to tell the truth. Denise sat with tears streaming down her face as she watched Keisha lie to protect the man who had nearly killed her. Despite Keisha's testimony, the physical evidence was too compelling to ignore completely. The jury found Damon guilty of aggravated assault rather than attempted murder, accepting that while he had certainly intended to harm his wife, they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he had intended to kill her. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 2 years for good behavior. Is that all? Denise demanded after the sentencing, confronting the district attorney in the courthouse hallway. 5 years for trying to kill my daughter? She'll have brain damage for the rest of her life. We did the best we could with what we had, the prosecutor explained wearily. Without your daughter's cooperation, this was the best outcome we could hope for. Keisha's recovery was slow and painful. The bullet had caused significant damage to her brain, affecting her motor skills, speech, and cognitive function. Simple tasks that she had once performed without thinking, walking, writing, even forming complete sentences, now required tremendous effort and concentration. She moved in with her parents, who helped care for the girls while she focused on rehabilitation. Physical therapy helped her regain some use of the right side of her body, though she would always walk with a limp and struggle with fine motor skills. Speech therapy improved her ability to communicate, though she still had trouble finding words when she was tired or stressed. The hardest part wasn't the physical limitations, it was watching how the trauma had affected her daughters. Aaliyah, now 7, had become withdrawn and anxious. She had nightmares about the night the police came to take her from her bed, and she flinched whenever anyone raised their voice. Zaria, only 3, didn't understand why Mommy walked funny and talked differently, but she could sense the sadness and tension that surrounded their family. Despite everything, Keisha visited Damon regularly in prison. He seemed genuinely remorseful, participating in every rehabilitation program the facility offered: anger management, substance abuse treatment, individual therapy. He wrote her long letters about how much he had changed, how prison had given him time to reflect on his actions and their consequences. "I know now that I was trying to control you because I was afraid of losing you," he wrote in one letter. "But I almost lost you forever because of my fear. I understand now what real love means. It means trusting the person you love to make their own choices, even when those choices scare you. I'll never make that mistake again. I love you too much." Keisha clung to these words, reading and rereading the letters until they were soft with handling. This was the man she had married, the charming, thoughtful Damon who had swept her off her feet. The violence had been an aberration, a symptom of stress and fear that could be treated and overcome. Her family tried desperately to convince her otherwise. Jerome came to see her every day after work, his eyes filling with tears as he looked at his daughter's permanent disabilities. "Baby girl, he shot you in the head," he would say, his voice breaking. "He pointed a gun at you and pulled the trigger. That's not something you do to someone you love, not ever, not under any circumstances." "He was under tremendous pressure, Daddy," Keisha would reply. "His business was failing, he was drinking too much, he wasn't thinking clearly. People make mistakes when they're desperate. Shooting your wife isn't a mistake, Keisha. It's attempted murder." But Keisha had built her entire adult identity around being Damon's wife. Even with a bullet in her brain, even with permanent disabilities, even with 2 traumatized children, she couldn't let go of the belief that their love could overcome anything. When the parole board granted Damon's early release after serving just 2 years for good behavior, Keisha was overjoyed. Despite her parents' desperate pleas, despite the concerns of her doctors and therapists, despite the obvious terror in Aaliyah's eyes when she told her that Daddy was coming home, Keisha moved back into the house she had shared with Damon. "You're making a terrible mistake," Jerome told her the day she moved out of her parents' house. "If he hurts you again, if he hurts those girls, I won't be able to live with myself for not stopping this." "He won't hurt us, Daddy," Keisha insisted, though her words were slightly slurred and she had to use a walker to maintain her balance. "He's changed. You'll see." The day Damon was released from prison, Keisha spent hours preparing for his homecoming. She had the house cleaned from top to bottom, prepared his favorite meal, and dressed the girls in their best clothes. Despite her physical limitations, she wanted everything to be perfect. But there was an undercurrent of tension that no amount of preparation could dispel. Aaliyah, now 9 years old, stayed close to her little sister and watched the door with the wary eyes of a child who had learned too young that the adults who were supposed to protect her could also be the source of danger. Zaria, now 5, didn't remember much about the night their father had shot their mother, but she had absorbed the family's anxiety and stress. She clung to Keisha's good arm and asked repeatedly when Grandma and Grandpa were coming to visit. When Damon finally walked through the front door, the first thing Keisha noticed was how much he had changed. Prison had aged him. His hair was graying at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He seemed smaller somehow, less commanding than the man who had dominated their household for so many years. "My girls," he said softly, his voice breaking with emotion as he looked at his family. "My beautiful girls." Aaliyah pressed herself against Keisha's side and didn't respond to her father's outstretched arms. Zaria hid behind her mother's walker, peeking out at this stranger who claimed to be her daddy. For the first few weeks, Damon seemed like a different person. He was patient with Keisha's limitations, helping her when she struggled with tasks that had once been simple. He was gentle with the girls, speaking softly and moving slowly, as if he understood that sudden movements or loud voices might frighten them. He attended his mandatory therapy sessions and parole meetings without complaint. He looked for work, though his criminal record made it difficult to find anything in his previous field. He seemed humble, grateful, and genuinely remorseful for what he had put his family through. "I know I have a lot to make up for," he told Keisha one night as they lay in bed together for the first time in 2 years. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your forgiveness." For a brief, shining moment, Keisha believed that her faith had been justified. Damon really had changed. Prison really had given him the help he needed. Their family could heal and move forward together. But old patterns, especially patterns of power and control, are extraordinarily difficult to break. The first sign that Damon's transformation might not be as complete as it appeared came about 6 weeks after his release. He had been looking for work steadily, but his criminal record made it nearly impossible to find anything in real estate or business. The few job offers he received were for positions far below his previous status: sales clerk, warehouse worker, customer service representative. "How am I supposed to provide for this family on $10 an hour?" he complained one evening after another failed interview. "I have an MBA and 15 years of business experience, and they want to treat me like some high school dropout." Keisha tried to be supportive. "Maybe it's just temporary. Once you prove yourself, you can work your way up." "Work my way up?" Damon's voice had an edge that Keisha remembered all too well. "I built a multi-million-dollar business before I was 30. I shouldn't have to work my way up from the bottom because of one mistake." The word mistake hung in the air between them. Shooting your wife in the head wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate act of violence. But Keisha didn't correct him. She had learned long ago that challenging Damon's version of events only led to conflict. "Maybe I could look for part-time work," she suggested carefully. "Just until you find something better. With my disabilities, I might qualify for some programs that could help." The suggestion was meant to be supportive, but it had the opposite effect. Damon's face darkened, and Keisha immediately realized her mistake. "You want to work?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "After everything we've been through, you want to go back to the same pattern that caused our problems in the first place?" "It's not the same," Keisha said quickly. "I just want to help. We have expenses, and if I could contribute something." "I don't need help from my disabled wife," Damon snapped, and the cruelty of the words hit Keisha like a physical blow. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and Keisha saw the same cold contempt in his eyes that she had seen the night he shot her. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the expression was gone, replaced by his usual facade of remorse and concern. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't mean that. I'm just frustrated about the job situation. You know, I don't think of you as disabled." But the damage was done. Keisha had been reminded that underneath Damon's reformed exterior, the same controlling, cruel man still existed. As the weeks passed, more cracks appeared in Damon's facade of transformation. The stress of his diminished status, the constraints of his parole, and the constant reminders of what he had lost began to erode his carefully maintained self-control. He started drinking again, claiming that one beer with dinner wasn't the same as the heavy drinking that had contributed to his violent outburst. But one beer became two, then 3, then a 6-pack. He began to chafe against the restrictions of his parole, the mandatory check-ins, the required therapy sessions, the prohibition against owning firearms. He complained that he was being treated like a criminal instead of someone who had made a mistake and learned from it. Most troubling to Keisha, he started to show signs of his old controlling behavior. He questioned her about phone calls from her parents, wanting to know what they had discussed and why she needed to talk to them so often. He checked the mileage on her car and asked for explanations when it was higher than he expected. "I'm just trying to understand your routine," he would say when Keisha questioned his monitoring. "I want to be involved in your life again." But to Keisha, it felt like surveillance. The same suffocating control that had characterized their marriage before was slowly reasserting itself. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November, almost 4 months after Damon's release. He had come home from another failed job interview in a foul mood, and Keisha had made the mistake of suggesting that he might want to consider taking one of the lower-level positions temporarily. "Just until something better comes along," she said, trying to keep her voice gentle and supportive. "At least it would be income, and it might lead to other opportunities." Damon's reaction was immediate and explosive. "I am not taking some minimum-wage job stocking shelves," he shouted, his face flushing red with anger. "I have a reputation in this city. I have contacts, relationships. What would people think if they saw me in some dead-end retail job?" The volume of his voice made both girls look up from their homework at the kitchen table. Aaliyah immediately began gathering her sister's things, preparing to take her upstairs and away from the conflict. "The girls can hear you," Keisha said quietly. "The girls can hear me?" Damon's voice got even louder. "Don't tell me how to talk in my own house." And there it was, the same phrase, the same tone, the same barely controlled rage that had preceded the worst violence in their relationship. Keisha felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized the familiar pattern of escalation. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. "I didn't mean to upset you. I was just trying to help." But apologies and submission no longer had the power to defuse Damon's anger the way they once had. Prison had changed him in some ways, but it had also left him with a deep well of resentment and a hair-trigger temper that seemed to get worse with each passing day. "Help?" he sneered. "You want to help? Then stop undermining me. Stop questioning my decisions. Stop acting like you know better than I do." Aaliyah appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale with fear. "Mom? Is everything okay?" The sight of his daughter's frightened face seemed to enrage Damon even further. "Go to your room," he shouted, pointing a finger at her. "This doesn't concern you." "Don't talk to her like that," Keisha said, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. "She's just worried." "You're turning my own kids against me," Damon accused, his voice rising to a roar. "First your parents, now my daughters. Everyone's against me because of you." The argument continued to escalate, with Damon's voice getting louder and his gestures more aggressive. Finally, Keisha saw him look toward the drawer where his gun had once been kept. It was empty now. A condition of his parole was that he couldn't own firearms, but the muscle memory was still there. That's when Keisha realized with crystal clarity that nothing had really changed. Damon might have learned to control his temper better in prison, but he hadn't actually changed his fundamental beliefs about power, control, and his right to dominate his family. What Keisha didn't know was that Damon had acquired a new gun illegally, purchasing it from a contact he had made in prison. He had hidden it in the garage, wrapped in an old blanket and tucked behind some paint cans where he was sure Keisha would never find it. The thought of the weapon gave him a sense of power and control that he had been missing since his release. His parole officer might have taken away his legal right to own firearms, but Damon had never accepted that anyone had the authority to dictate the terms of his life. On the night of February 14th, Valentine's Day, ironically, everything came to a head. Damon had been drinking more heavily than usual, drowning his frustrations about his continued unemployment and his growing resentment toward Keisha and the girls. In his mind, they were the reason his life had fallen apart. If Keisha had just been a supportive wife instead of questioning his decisions, none of this would have happened. The argument started over something trivial. Keisha had forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning, but quickly escalated into a rehashing of all their old grievances. "I asked you to do one simple thing," Damon said, his words slightly slurred from alcohol. "One thing. And you couldn't even manage that." "I'm sorry," Keisha said, her speech still impaired from her brain injury. "I was helping Zaria with her homework, and it slipped my mind. I'll get it tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Damon repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "Always tomorrow with you." Never today. Never when I need it. The familiarity of the argument, the sense that they were trapped in an endless cycle of conflict and violence, suddenly overwhelmed Keisha. For the first time since his release, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her anger and disappointment. "You know what, Damon," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Maybe the problem isn't that I forgot to pick up your dry cleaning. Maybe the problem is that you're a grown man who can't handle his own responsibilities." The words were out before she could stop them, and she immediately knew she had made a fatal mistake. Damon's face went completely still, his eyes turning cold and flat. Without saying a word, he turned and walked toward the garage. Keisha knew with absolute certainty what he was going for. She had seen that look before, in the moments before he had shot her the first time. But her body, still weakened and slowed by her injuries, couldn't move fast enough to stop him or to get herself and the girls to safety. When Damon returned with the gun, there was no negotiation, no final argument, no last chance for apologies or explanations. "You never learned," he said simply, raising the weapon and pointing it at the same spot on her head where he had shot her before. "You never understood what it means to be a real wife." "Please," Keisha whispered, thinking of her daughters upstairs. The girls will be better off without a mother who doesn't respect their father," Damon said coldly. The second gunshot was final. This time, there was no coma, no miraculous survival, no second chance. The bullet that Damon fired into his wife's head on Valentine's Day killed her instantly. Unlike the first shooting, Damon made no attempt to flee. When the police arrived, called by neighbors who had heard the gunshot, they found him sitting calmly at his kitchen table, the gun placed neatly beside him. "She pushed me to this," he told the arresting officers, showing no emotion or remorse. "I tried to make our marriage work, but she never respected me as the head of the household." The trial was swift and decisive. Without Keisha there to defend him or claim the shooting was an accident, the evidence spoke for itself. The jury took just 3 hours to return a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. During the sentencing phase, family members and friends testified about the impact of Keisha's death. Her parents, aged beyond their years by grief and trauma, spoke about losing their daughter twice, first to an abusive marriage, then to murder. "She was so smart, so full of promise," Denise testified through tears. "She could have been anything she wanted to be. Instead, she died defending a man who saw her as property instead of a person." When the judge asked Damon if he had anything to say before sentencing, he looked directly at Keisha's family. "I loved her more than any of you ever did," he said, his voice flat and unemotional. "She would still be alive if you hadn't filled her head with ideas about independence and disrespect." The judge was unmoved by this final attempt to shift blame. "Mr. Brooks, you have shown no remorse for taking the life of the mother of your children. You continue to blame everyone but yourself for your actions. You are a danger to society and will remain so for the rest of your life." The sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The warning signs were all there in Keisha's relationship with Damon, the quick progression of their relationship, his need to control her education and career, his monitoring of her activities, his isolation of her from family and friends. His financial control, his explosive anger, and his pattern of violence followed by apologies and gifts. But perhaps the most important warning sign was his fundamental belief that Keisha existed to serve his needs and that her independence and autonomy were threats to their relationship rather than essential components of a healthy partnership. If you recognize any of these patterns in your own relationship or in the relationship of someone you care about, please know that help is available. This story can be a warning, a lesson, a call to action. Her story can save lives if we let it. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.